valid point. All right. Okay, what we're going to cover today is Congress. All right, well, not a lot. Some of this is a little redundant or historical stuff from A. Bush. You'll see me move through this relatively quickly. The PowerPoint has already been uploaded to Edmodo. All right, so if I'm going a little too fast, you'll be able to find this on Edmodo already. And again, when we talked about sort of the founding of the United States all the way back in 1787 and Congress, we know that we had fear of a few things, right? Fear of tyranny, right? We talked about that already. Tyranny can come from more than just an individual. We were actually afraid of sort of a tyrannical Congress as well. So one of the things that we do in order to try to stifle that is how we actually structure Congress initially. All right. So we're afraid of the concentration of power, but we're also afraid of, well, really the stupidity of Americans. All right.
Well, I think I read somewhere like the founders, they wanted, like they tried to make them all the branches balanced, but they wanted Congress to be the most powerful.
Congress is supposed to be the most powerful. That's true. They're not all supposed to be balanced. They're supposed to check one another. That's absolutely true. Okay? And there's supposed to be some balance to the power, but not like an actual scale where it's even.
Yeah.
Congress is supposed to be the most important branch of government. Okay? In fact, when things are going really well, like let's just say for the sake of argument that in 2 years, right, everything in this country is going great, don't give the credit to Donald Trump. Give the credit to Congress. Okay? Conversely, if everything's going terrible in 2 years, don't blame Donald Trump. Blame Congress. Okay? Congress is ultimately more responsible than what the President of the United States is. All right? So, out of a lot of these spheres, we're going to create a bicameral legislation. Bicameral, we know means two, right? Okay? Cameral refers to houses. Okay? So a bicameral legislature means we have two houses. All right? We have an upper house and a lower house. The upper house is the Senate. The lower house is the House of Representatives. The upper house is created in large part as a check upon the lower house. All right? Because the lower house is the House of Representatives that is elected directly by the people. And so the Senate is meant to check the House of Representatives. And we'll see how that plays out in some of their actual sort of procedural aspects as well. Okay? And then the last bullet point up there is just what Kyle said. Congress is supposed to be most dominant or most important. Now, when we look at congressional power, all right, we come up with one basic sort of conversation we have to have, right? And that is, do we want centralization or decentralization of power? What do I mean when I say that? Okay, here is your basic sort of short and sweet definition here. Centralization, right? Fast, consolidated, powerful. That's centralization. Okay? So decisive, consolidated, powerful. Decentralization would be the opposite. Okay? So when you look at something that is centralized, okay, you've got restrictions on debate, meaning debate can only occur for so long. You can't stall the debate. You have limited sort of opportunities to stop what's going on, right? And so that's how we actually ultimately get to this concept right here near the bottom, a streamlined legislative process. When you have centralized power in Congress, it gives Congress the authority to act quickly and decisively in order to pass legislation for the betterment of the United States. All right? That's centralization, which then leads us to decentralization. Okay? This would be the opposite. Now we want to have very few restrictions on debate. So you can talk as long as you want, right? You want to have opportunities to stall. You want to have opportunities to slow things down. You want to make the whole legislative process, right, very delayed and very cumbersome. To use a word off your test from yesterday. Cumbersome. In case how many of you did not know what that word meant on your test yesterday? You're not the only one, I promise you. Alright? Now, show of hands. Who thinks that Congress should be centralized? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Decentralized. Okay, 9 total people voted in the room. Awesome. Which means over half of you are clueless or apathetic. I don't know which. Okay. Do we know what the ideal is? Do we know what the actual purpose is? So I just asked you what you thought was better, whether you thought centralization or decentralization was better. What about our founders? Right? The system that they created, is it supposed to be centralized or decentralized?
Kind of a mix, like, you mean like just in terms of Congress, or like
Yes.
in terms of like?
Just in terms of Congress.
Oh. I was thinking in terms of like Congress, like the state and national government.
No, just in terms of Congress. It should be decentralized. Okay? Now, why should it be decentralized?
So that people don't have, like, well, so stuff can't get passed easily. But there has to be a good reason, and there has to be a consensus that it's good legislation or whatever is trying to get done.
Yeah, you actually don't want to enter into a situation where it's too easy for Congress to get things done. Because when it becomes too easy for Congress to accomplish things, they're going to create all kinds of laws that are really just sort of asinine and ridiculous. And the truth of the matter is that there are all manner of laws that still exist today that are ridiculous. Right? Okay? There's still more than a dozen states in the United States of America in which interracial marriage is technically illegal. Yes. That's a fact. I'm not making that up. These were laws that were created many, many years ago, and nobody ever bothered to get rid of them.
What do you mean by technically illegal?
Meaning that if you married a black woman, you could be prosecuted in the state of Texas. If you married a Hispanic woman, you could be prosecuted in the state of Texas.
Like for that marriage, or you mean like?
Yes, for the violation of state law 113 point whatever. I have no idea what the number
Some
is.
people still do it.
Well, absolutely, because those laws are not enforced. And because that gets into a whole other concept, and that's why it really should be decentralized. Because I'm going to be 100% honest. There should be like a cap on the number of laws that are actually allowed to exist. Alright? Because the average American, and you might be unaware of this, the average American breaks the law 3 times a day. Without ever being aware that they have broken the law. So I'm not talking about how many of you drove to school this morning, right? And how many of you sped while you drove to school this morning? I'm not talking about that. You knowingly violated the law there. You knew you broke the law. You just didn't get caught. Okay? I'm talking about 3 times a day Americans break laws that they did not know existed. Meaning, you might have been chewing gum in public. Because there are some cities in which chewing gum in public is illegal. Okay? You might have filled your car up with gasoline, and when you pulled the little nozzle out of your car, you spilled 1 drop on the ground. That's a crime. Okay? These are real laws that actually exist. Alright? Which is why ultimately you want that sort of decentralized process. You don't want a ton of laws being created, because then one of the things that you can ultimately get at is you can end up having a situation in which laws and specifically sort of any type of ordinance that is meant to not necessarily be punitive, but rather generate revenue, right? Because that's not the purpose of the judicial system. right? But if you have let's just say for the sake of argument, you have a city ordinance that says chewing gum is illegal and a cop catches you chewing gum, right? They write you a ticket. What happens? Now you gotta go to court, you gotta pay your little $20 fine because you were chewing gum. Are you gonna fight that ticket? How many of you have $500 laying around to pay an attorney to fight that ticket? No, you're gonna pay your 20 bucks, right? Which then incentivizes the city or the town to go out and write more of those tickets because it's a means of revenue for them. Alright, which is not the way the judicial department is supposed to work. This is just some of the history of periods of time in which we had centralization or decentralization. I'm going to let you look through that on your own time. The only thing that I want to cover, because we really are a little bit more decentralized today than what we had been in the past in times, and that's due in part to what's bolded up here on this slide. I want you to understand that this is a relatively new ideology, subcommittees, right? Let me backtrack real quick. How many of us remember from 8th grade watching that little I'm Just a Bill? Right, is that when we watched it, 8th grade? 5th grade? I don't know when y'all watch it out here. Okay? So, you know how like a bill becomes a law then. Alright? When you have decentralization, one of the aspects of it is that committees become really important. And in fact, most pieces of legislation now, okay, meaning a majority of legislation that is written dies in committee. It never even makes it out of a committee. Okay? That increased the power of committees. Committees got a little too powerful. And so what they did is they divided the power of committees by creating committees within committees called subcommittees. The chairman of the committee used to be really powerful, especially if it was a sort of powerful committee to begin with. Right? So like the Senate Armed Forces Committee, that's a powerful committee. Right? They basically control financing for the military. That means that whoever that chairman is wielded a significant amount of power in determining what private company, whether it was Lockheed or Boeing or whomever, got government contracts for military technology. And when those committee chairmen got too powerful, we created subcommittees that decreases their power a little bit. Okay? And this is a test question, so I wanted to draw your attention to that. And now, we also need to realize that the Senate and the House of Representatives are actually very different. Okay? They're actually very different in how they function. Okay? In fact, if you look at the two of them, okay, the Senate is actually more decentralized than what the House of Representatives is. That means that the House of Representatives has a little bit more structure to it. Alright, that's due for a couple of different reasons. Okay? One, historically, representatives were less prestigious than senators. Okay? In fact, the way that it's supposed to work is the House of Representatives should really be like average people. Right? You go and you serve for 2 years, and then when your 2 years is up, you go back to whatever your regular job was. When this country was founded or created, politician was not ever meant to be a career choice. And if you looked at the vast majority of our early politicians, they had real jobs. Okay, meaning careers outside of politics. The House of Representatives was supposed to be indicative of that. Right? In which case you would have teachers and doctors and police officers and all kinds of people that would go and they would serve for 2 years or maybe 4 years, and then they would go back and they would go about the rest of their life. Right? That required a little bit more rigidity in the House of Representatives because they wouldn't have necessarily understood the rules quite as well. They would not have been as well versed in sort of debate and discussion and things like that. The Senate, on the other hand, historically they're appointed by the state legislature. They're a little bit higher class citizens, right? A little bit more politically affluent. They would have understood a little bit more, and they were also appointed for 6 years rather than 2. Okay, so the Senate, what you see is because it has fewer members and because these members are more elite, there are fewer formal rules. And this leads to a situation in which the Senate is actually able to sort of slow down the legislative process even more. Okay? And the big point here, the big way that they do this is through the use of filibuster. If you've never heard that term, it's a term you need to familiarize yourself with now. A filibuster is where one of the individual 100 senators takes the floor, meaning that they are afforded the opportunity to speak. They will start speaking and they will refuse to stop. That's it. They just refuse to stop speaking. And it is a tool to try to stop any sort of debate or having any sort of vote on any piece of legislation in the Senate. The only way that you can overcome a filibuster, or the only way you used to be able to overcome a filibuster, was if you had a 60% vote. Meaning 60 of the senators had to vote to go ahead and end the debate and call for an actual vote on whatever the issue was. And the Senate has changed their rules. I'm not 100% certain exactly what the process is now because it's never been used. But pay attention to this. You might actually see it in the next month or so, depending on what happens with, what's his first name, Neil Gorsuch?
Like the nuclear option?
Yes. And that's the way, and the irony is that it was actually the Democrats who created the option when they had a slight majority in the Senate. It's never been used though, and now the Republicans have a slight majority in the Senate, which means that they could enact this option in order to confirm Gorsuch if necessary. All right. Again, that's some of the historical stuff that I'm going to let you look through. Okay. Now, when we actually look at sort of Congress and some of the structure here, we know that in the House of Representatives, or hopefully we've learned this at some point in time in the past, the House of Representatives, they're elected to 2-year terms. And their term begins in January of every odd-numbered year. They're elected in November of every even-numbered year. So, 2016, we had an election that included all congressmen, all representatives. Their Congress, or their term in Congress, began January 3rd of 2017. They will serve for 2 years, and then in January of 2019, our next Congress will start. We actually number our Congresses, and what you will find is that today we're at like 114 or 115, somewhere around there. All right. 2 years from now, it will be one number higher. All right. With the Congress, in order for Congress to stop debating, this is called adjournment. Okay, this actually ends their term. Okay. And they have 2 terms, so it's basically 1 per year. Adjournment is agreed upon by both houses. Adjournment is different than recesses. Recesses occur regularly and can be done, just the House can be in recess, or just the Senate can be in recess. All right. House of Representatives, excuse me, too many. The House of Representatives is designed to be close to the people. We talked about this. Okay, they're directly elected. You actually have an opportunity to run into Pete Olson. And in fact, one of my students from last semester knew Pete Olson. And I guess she went to school with Pete Olson's kids at some private school before she came here. All right. Legislature is elected every 2 years. And then this is really important because this shows up on tests, pretty much every AP test. You need to understand this concept. We know what revenue is, right? Revenue is money. Okay? All revenue bills must originate in the House. Okay? They have to. That is a requirement based upon the Constitution because revenue for the government comes from where?
The people.
How? Taxes from the people. Therefore, the House of Representatives is the body for the people. Therefore, they control the finances. Okay? That's the way that it is supposed to work. Okay? The Senate, on the other hand, they're elected. Originally they were indirectly elected, meaning they were appointed by state legislatures. Okay? They're directly elected now. they're elected every 6 years, and 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election every 2 years. So the way that it works is actually kind of like this, like I just put up here on the board. Alright, so what you would see is it basically goes through this order, and you get 33, like 33, 33, and then 34. Okay? So Alabama, and then no Alabama senators up for election there. I don't know if these are actually accurate, right? I just went alphabetically with the states. Right? Alaska, Arizona. What you'll find, because I do know that with Texas, we did not have a Senate seat up for election here in 2016 in Texas. Right? That means that in 2018, one of the 2 Senate seats from Texas will be up for re-election. Memory serves, that'll be Ted Cruz's position. Okay? And then in 2020, John Cornyn will be up for re-election as well. Right? Then back to 2022, we will not have a Senate seat open at that point. Alright? Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay, when you look at the size of Congress, and specifically the size of the House of Representatives, the size of the House of Representatives has actually been the same since 1911. That means that in 1911, there were 435 members of Congress. Anybody want to guess what the population of the United States was in 1910? I'm going to use 1910 because that's the census year. In which case we would have actually counted the population. Anybody want to guess?
Yeah, like 100 million, right?
What?
Like 100 million?
That's fairly close, actually. Right? 92 million. What's the population of the United States today?
360 million.
What?
Like 360 million.
You're a little high again. 30. Right? So 330 million versus 92 million. That means that our population has more than tripled, yet our representation in Congress has remained the same. Now, take this even a step forward. How many states were there in 1911? Say 12? How many states were there in the United States in 1911?
48.
45.
There was definitely less than 50. Okay? Alaska and Hawaii don't join until the 50s. Oklahoma is the last of the contiguous states, and it joined somewhere in the 19 teens. So I'm not 100% certain. Okay? But basically it would have been somewhere between 45 and 48. We still haven't had a congressman. Which means that all we've done is reapportion and taken seats from some states, even though their population has continued to rise, and give those seats to other states. In fact, when you look at my little map up here, I don't know if anybody's ever noticed, but up in the corner, right, or somewhere with various states, you'll see a little plus or a minus and a blue number. And those are changes in the number of seats in the House of Representatives based upon a census. Right, so in 2010, Texas increased and was actually given 4 more seats in the House of Representatives because the population of the state of Texas increased that drastically. Right? And if you actually look, you notice that most Americans here are leaving the Rust Belt. Right? I don't know if anybody's ever lived up there, but it sucks. Especially the winters. Alright? Okay. Terms are fixed. They're 2 years. There have been some states that have actually tried, unsuccessfully, but have tried to put term limits on representatives. Okay? That was actually deemed unconstitutional. Somebody in this class should have had U.S. term limits versus Thornton in their SCOTUS project. Anybody remember having it? No? Okay.
Well, like I know Ted Cruz and some other guy from like the East Coast, they both like submitted like legislation for term limits on senators and representatives like last month or something.
Yeah, I don't know guys.
Like why? How is that unconstitutional?
The state tried to implement it within that state. And the Supreme Court found that that was in violation of the Constitution. That there's nothing in the Constitution that prohibits people from running as long as they want. in which case the state, because that's the national government, the state can't dictate that. If the state wanted to have term limits on the state legislature, they could do that. But they can't put term limits on the national government.
What if like proposing an amendment for term limits?
That's what you'd have to do, which is why it'll never happen. Okay? Despite the fact that it absolutely should.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when you look, and we might have talked about this at least a little bit, I don't know, maybe this was last semester and I don't remember. When I taught this class in North Carolina, I used to show them their congressman. Their congressman was a guy named Howard Coble. Howard Coble took office in 1982. Okay? And quit, retired, if I remember correctly, in like 2014. Okay? He died in 2015. That's how old that dude was. Alright? What was it? Jesse Helms, who was a former senator from the state of South Carolina, was elected to the Senate in 1954. He stopped serving as a senator in 2002. 48 years as a senator. Alright? Term limits would probably be a good thing. Qualifications for the House of Representatives: you have to be at least 25, you have to have been a citizen for 7 years, and you have to live in the district in which you are being elected. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about gerrymandering. Right, with the Senate's got 100 members, it's much smaller, 6-year term limits. We talked about how they're staggered. Qualifications here: you got to be 30, you have to be a citizen for 9 years, and again, you have to live in the state in which you represent. Right? As far as compensation goes, salaries of Congress are actually set by Congress. Lucky for them. Wish I could set my own salary. With the 27th Amendment, however, their salary does not take effect. If they change it, it can't take effect until the next Congress, right? So you can't change your salary in the middle of a term. And they also get to set the President and the Supreme Court's salaries. They can't change those in the middle of a term either, right? Because that could be used as sort of incentive, right? We like what the Supreme Court's doing, let's give them a big raise. We don't like what the Supreme Court's doing, let's take away money from them, right? Doesn't make sense. Okay? They have a number of other sorts of perks, some of which we've talked about with the incumbency advantage and re-election already. Okay? Salaries, these are actually out of date. Not terribly, but the regular member of Congress, if I remember correctly now, makes like $180,000 a year. Leaders within the Congress make close to $200,000. The Speaker of the House makes like $225,000. Okay, significant amount of money for ultimately what's a fairly easy job in terms of like workloads, right? And especially when you consider if you don't show up to work, nobody. Oh well, right? Because if you're a senator, who's your only boss? Nobody knows who your boss is? See, senators probably have the same response. My guess is that senators don't know who their boss is either. Their constituents. Do we know what that word means?
People that elect them.
The people that elect them. Well, not just elect them, the people that they represent. You are all constituents of Pete Olson, Ted Cruz, and John Cornyn. Now, even though you've not even voted yet for any of those people, well, I don't know, some of you might have voted for Pete Olson or against him, but you're still their constituents. And ultimately, that's who they should be responsible to. You are their boss. If they stop showing up to work, you should stop voting for them. When we look at the membership of Congress, anybody shocked by the statistics? Right? So I think we talked about this when we talked about voting, right? Let's just stereotype for a second. If if we were to stereotype the most common voter in America, what would that individual look like? White, male, educated, old, upper middle class, right? What do we find our representatives are? Old, white, male, educated, upper middle class. So on some level, you actually can't be mad that Congress is not representative of the American people, when it's actually fairly representative of the actual Americans who vote. Alright? Now, on the bright side, it's getting a little bit better. We see more women and more minorities being elected to Congress than what we have in the past. Alright? Obviously, it's not close to representative of our actual demographic breakup in the United States. Alright, we're going to stop there, because I got through what I wanted, and we're going to do a little FRQ practice.